Hey y'all, Pathfinder here. Before we start today, I wanted to introduce myself a little bit better than my last video. As you're probably about to find out later in this video, I'm not just a role-playing game nerd, I'm also a giant math nerd. You can follow me over on Reddit. My account is AAABattery03 and you can find a link in the channel description. I post a lot of gameplay advice and mathematical analyses regarding Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I like to look at the game's math a little more deeply than a surface level DPR analysis, and I find that it gives me a lot of unique insights on how the game plays out and how it's meant to play out. And well, today you're going to find out exactly why I call myself Mathfinder, as we analyze another one of my personal favorite spells. Acid Grip is a new spell introduced with the remaster, replacing the old Acid Arrow. Acid Arrow used to be a very good spell for dealing damage, largely for maguses, but even so much for other spellcasters, and thus Acid Grip has kind of flown under the radar because it's seen as a nerf. If you look at the way Acid Grip can be used, it provides a very unique tool in the spellcaster's arsenal, force movement. So to get started, Acid Grip. It has the standard traits that you would expect from the spell, the Acid and Concentrate and Manipulate traits. It's 2 actions and a 120-foot range, targets 1 creature targeting its reflex saving throw. It does a bunch of acid damage and persistent acid damage depending on that save. And if the persistent acid damage is inflicted, which only happens on a failure or worse, it takes status penalty to its speeds. On a crit success, nothing happens. On a success, they take the initial damage but not the persistent damage, and they're moved 5 feet in any direction. On a failure, more of the damage, and they move 10 feet. And on a critical failure, they take double the damage, and they move 20 feet in any direction of your choice. Before getting into any considerations about Acid Grip and the tactics behind using it, I wanted to cover the larger topic of reliability. This is a topic I will be covering in great depth in a later series of videos, and right now you're going to get a sneak preview. One of the big reasons Acid Grip and other spells like Acid Grip get underrated is because of their comparison with skill actions. On a skill action, the standard outcome is you succeed on your check against the opponent. For a spell, the standard outcome is your opponent succeeds on their saving throw against your spell. And if the opponent succeeded, that's kind of like you failing. Therefore, the spell must be less reliable than the skill, right? When you look at it on a deeper level, strip away the word success and failure, I think it becomes clear that spells tend to be the more reliable of the two. It's not skill actions that are more reliable, it's spells. But of course, you shouldn't be taking my word for it. This is Mathfinder, so let's find out. So to start with, we will be comparing the performance of a level 7 party versus a level 9 boss. We're going to compare 2 different level 7 characters. One of them will be using athletics to shove or reposition the boss. The other will be using Acid Grip to reposition the boss according to the spell. I chose level 7 on purpose for the player's reference point here, because level 7 is the level at which skill users can attain master proficiency in their skill, and also most likely will have an item bonus of some kind attached to that skill, which means they have a whole +3 over the spell user, if not more. That means the skill user should blow the spell user out of the water, and yet, as we're about to find out, that's not the case. The choice of level 9 boss here is also specific. I like using a boss 2 levels above the party as a reference for my reliability. A boss that's 3 or more levels above, nothing you do is reliable against them. The best you can do is teamwork and hope something sticks. Something lower than that gap away from you, something that's only 1 level above or the same level or even lower level, your reliability expands a lot, but that's because these enemies swarm you in larger numbers, so reliability tends to be a little less important than potency. Level 9 is a sweet spot where I find that stress testing something's reliability here is really useful. For the Marshal, they have a +18 to their athletics, and the boss, we're going to assume they have a moderate fortitude DC. And these are the possible outcomes that can lead to. So when you shove or reposition someone on a crit fail, they don't move and you fall prone, and that's going to happen 5% of the time, exactly on a natural 1. On a fail, which happens between a 2 and a 9, 40% of the time, nothing happens. On a success, which happens 50% of the time, on an 11 to 19, you'll push them 5 feet. And on a critical success, which happens exactly in a natural 20, you'll push them 10 feet. You'll notice I erased the words success, failure, etc. from these outcomes because I think they somewhat muddle the conversation. Why not let's just compare the actual outcomes? How much are we moving the enemy by, and how much risk are we putting ourselves at? So now let's look at the spellcaster. The caster's spell save DC is 25, expert proficiency, and +4 to either intelligence, charisma, or wisdom. This is against a +21 reflex save, and you will notice I have given the monster a higher reflex save than fortitude to make this even worse for the spellcaster. The spellcaster now has a +6 worth of disadvantages, and on top of that there is a principle called roller's advantage where the person making the roll wins ties and has a higher average roll, which corresponds to another +2 against the caster. In terms of just pure d20 versus d20 math, the caster is supposed to be +10 behind. There's no contest, and yet there is a contest. In fact, the caster is comfortably ahead. If you look at the chances of nothing happening, it's 35% for the spellcaster. Meanwhile, the marshal has a 45% chance of nothing happening because it happens on a failure and on a crit failure, and out of that 45%, 5% corresponds to the marshal landing on their ass. If you're in a situation where all you have to do is move an enemy, and we'll get into why such a situation might arise later, an acid grip is going to succeed 10% more often than a marshal using a shove or a reposition with considerably less risk to yourself. If you're in a situation where the amount you move the enemy by matters, the caster is also getting that failure and crit failure to move 10 or 20 feet more often than the marshal's getting their 10-foot shove. On both extremes, the caster is winning this, despite all the advantages we gave to the marshal. And what happens if we flip the script? The fortitude and reflex. I assume the fortitude is lower. What if I assume the opposite? What if I assume the reflex is lower? There's simply no contest in reliability if you do this. The caster is 3 times less likely to do nothing than the marshal. The marshal has 60% and the caster is at 20%. And the caster is nearly 5 times likelier to move the opponent 10 feet or more. The only reason the marshal was even keeping up is because we gave them an artificial boost via assuming reflex would always be higher than fortitude. That's not always the case. Sometimes they're really close. Sometimes reflex is lower. Even if you assume it's 50-50, that means 50% of the time the caster is way ahead and the other 50% of the time the marshals are tied, which means the caster is just the more reliable one. And we're just looking at reliability right now. We haven't looked at all of the other virtual advantages of using acid grip. There are so many other reasons to be using acid grip over a shove or a reposition that go beyond just the reliability. There's a 120-foot range to consider. You can do this from 120 feet away. You don't have to be in melee. The risk that the marshal is putting themselves at isn't just to fall prone, it's also to just get smacked on the next turn of the opponent. There's also the persistent damage. Acid grip does damage on success, failure, and critical failure, along with moving the enemy, which means there's a lower opportunity cost to spending your 2 actions on acid grip because you're doing damage and moving them. Finally, acid grip doesn't contribute to your multiple attack penalty. When you shove, you're using your mapless, as it's called, your mapless attack to shove your opponent. If the marshal wants to make a follow-up attack, they're going to have a -5 most of the time to it. The caster can just use any one-action spell they wish to after this without having a multiple attack penalty. There are so many advantages to acid grip, and it's already the more reliable spell. By far, there was no contest. We had to stack the deck in the marshal's favor for them to only be tied, and any single circumstance changing would mean the caster got way ahead. So what's our takeaway from all of this? Where does all this reliability analysis leave us? Well, if you're in a situation where you really have to move an enemy really badly for one or the other reason, acid grip is the best way to do it. You'll do it reliably, you'll do it efficiently, you'll do it from far away without any real risk to yourself, and you'll do it with a very low opportunity cost since you're also inflicting a nice chunk of damage along the way. When do these scenarios pop up? When is it so important to move an enemy? That's the reason y'all are here, right? All of these scenarios are escalating levels of, we really need to move that one guy. So I'm going to be covering them in order from least tense to most tense. This is the least tense of the scenarios. There are 4 zombies approaching the party. Ezrin got the drop on them in initiative and has thrown out an Entangling Flora, a spell that slows and potentially immobilizes them depending on their exact saving throw results. Unfortunately, Ezrin gets unlucky. 3 of the 4 zombies managed to make their saving throws and are beginning to come around and swarm Kyra. Kyra is a cleric. She was planning on using her 3-action heals to clear these guys while they slowly trudge their way towards the party. She may have to reposition, and the longer a fight goes on like this, the longer your chances that you have to spend more resources taking care of these enemies, right? What Ezrin can do here is target this zombie right here with Acid Grip. Try to move them at least 5 feet back into the flora. Yet another chance to fail to approach the target because they got immobilized. Potentially an even bigger chance. If the zombie crit fails or fails against the Acid Grip, they might move 10 feet or even 20 feet into the entangling flora. And since this whole area is difficult terrain, that is a huge force multiplier. The party can easily take care of just these 2 zombies, and even if you'd only move them 5 feet, the zombie now needs to spend 1 action getting back here. Its offensive uptime is seriously reduced. It's unlikely to grab Kyra or deal significant amounts of damage, because zombies only get 2 actions per turn rather than 3, unlike most creatures. Acid Grip, when combined with another already good spell, kind of acts like a force multiplier. The forced movement lets you get more value out of an already good spell. Entangling Flora already did its job. It forced these zombies to spend multiple actions approaching the party and prevented the zombie from moving at all. This kind of force multiplier is pretty common for forced movement and how it combines with a lot of area of effect spells with persisting effects. A small segue here, because I mentioned forced movement and persisting effects. The rules on forced movement are sometimes a little up to GM interpretation. If the effect is moving you directly away or towards the person producing the effect, like a shove, you can move enemies through hazardous terrain or off of ledges, or the like. Abilities that reposition you with full freedom of choice, such as Acid Grip, don't allow you to just arbitrarily move enemies into any kind of terrain you want. That is purposely left up to GM interpretation. I chose Entangling Flora as an example because it is difficult terrain, not hazardous terrain, and it doesn't deal any damage. So it'd be pretty hard to argue that Acid Grip can't move a target into it, and your motions may vary. This is a conversation worth having with your GM if you plan to pick Acid Grip as a spell, but it's always going to be at least a little bit useful, as we'll see with the remaining scenarios. For scenario number 2, we're looking yet again at everyone's favorite, a cramped dungeon environment, because everyone loves abomination vaults, right? So let's say you're exploring this dungeon with your party. You come across this room that's worth investigating. The rogue walks in, makes sure that there's no traps in there. Then the cleric walks in because she spots some divine or divine adjacent items in there. And all of a sudden, 4 blood demons each spawn their ambush on you. 2 of them win initiative, and they have decided to try and separate the party by getting here and preventing the party from being able to rush out. Now, Mauricio is not too much at risk. She is a rogue, and rogues tend to be good at tumbling through enemies. She could get out if needed. Kyra is probably not very good at tumbling through, and she's also the party's main healer. It's not really great to have her stranded in a room with 2 blood demons, soon to be 4 blood demons. You can always move through an ally space without problem, right? What can the party do to get Kyra out of the situation? And what Ezrin does is he notices this little place where the party can make their stand. Ezrin can cast Acid Grip, targeting this blood demon right here. As long as it doesn't crit succeed, it's moved. Or I suppose it's moved here. Ezrin can now simply move himself in here, and so can the rest of the party. Kyra can take a few extra actions to just stride in. Valoros and Mauricio can take a strike or 2, depending on how many actions they could spare, and then also stride in here. All of a sudden, this fight that looked really dangerous for the party to take on is a lot easier. You're in a choke point. The enemy's numbers are somewhat neutralized. They can't effectively flank you. They can't effectively get out of areas of effect. The very bad situation you were in with your cleric and rogue being trapped on the other side of a wall of enemies has been neutralized, all by casting 1 spell that's most likely done a nice chunk of damage along the way too. A little bit of coordination served as a huge force multiplier for the party and made what would otherwise be a really tough encounter into a much easier encounter. If Kyra had stayed in there, she would probably have consumed 2 or 3 heals just to keep herself standing. So as I said, I'll be covering these in increasing levels of tension. The very first scenario I covered was just a case where Acid Grip was a nice to have. It help you get more value out of a spell that had already done its job. In the second scenario, it saved you a bunch of resources and potentially a bunch of time resting. And in this scenario, it is most likely going to prevent a TPK or a near TPK. Let's say the party is exploring in this cave system. Out of the ground burrows out an Orumvarax. The Orumvarax is a single target boss. It has higher stats in almost every regard compared to the party. It wins initiative, naturally, it hits Valeros and crits, naturally, and then it tries to grab him and critically succeeds. Valeros will have the Restrained condition. Restrained is a debilitating condition to have in this game. If you're restrained, you cannot move and you cannot take any actions that have the attack trait other than to try to escape the Restrained. Valeros now is not allowed to attack until he's escaped. His escapes are very unlikely to succeed because they require either an unarmed strike or an athletics check against the Orumvarax's athletics DC, and we can probably assume something that specializes in grabbing people has a very high athletics DC, much higher than its reflex for sure. And even if Valeros succeeds, he now has the multiple attack penalty because his escape action had the attack trait, so now his actual attack, what he's trying to do to progress the fight, is going to be way less accurate than it would be before. And that's not where you want to be when a fighter is your primary damage dealer. You need to progress the fight to its conclusion. You can't just be spending all of your time trying not to die. Ezrin can very efficiently make sure Valeros doesn't die here. He can just cast Acid Grip on the Orumvarax. It probably has a lower reflex than it has either Athletics or Fortitude, and as soon as it doesn't critically succeed at saving throw, it's moved 5 or more feet, which instantly ends the Restrained condition on Valeros. With that gone, Valeros is now free to just step up and attack the Orumvarax without any multiple attack penalty, without any restrictions, maybe even move away to make sure the Orumvarax can't efficiently grapple him or anyone else in the party. Ezrin did all of this for just 2 actions. He also got to do a little bit of damage, and he didn't have to put himself at risk. He's standing in the back. This was a situation where if the Orumvarax had maintained its grip on Valeros and if Valeros had to try to escape, the best case scenario would be a significant setback for the party, and the worst case scenario could just be that Valeros dies right there, restrained, not having done any damage, and the party is down 1 character. Acid Grip in this case was crucial in allowing the party to even function. And these sorts of scenarios pop up all the time in adventuring. I've covered 3, but forced movement is one of the most versatile options you can have in any D20 game. It's very easy to just come across a situation that is much easier if you have access to some forced movement. A small addendum, I went into how Acid Grip is probably more reliable than Shove or Escape. That is true if you look at the saves. Look, the Fortitude is higher than its reflex. Unknown to me when I picked this specific example, it was purely by coincidence, is that the Orumvarax has a special ability that actually makes its athletics, reflex, or fortitude even higher if Valeros is the one trying to shove or escape from this grab. On top of that, the Orumvarax has a very special ability that lets it make several attacks against a creature it has grabbed. 4 full strikes. And remember, this is a boss, which means even on its least accurate attacks, it is probably going to hit you. Valeros would almost certainly die if he tried to escape against this Tenacious Stance ability, failed to escape, and then ate the Rapid Raid. By pure coincidence, I chose a creature that was even more awful to try to escape or shove against, but I think it goes to show that just due to the thematics of monster design, the kind of creatures that are most likely to grab and restrain you are also the kinds of creatures it tends to be the hardest to get out of those grabs from. So to summarize all the reasons Acid Grip is a good spell, first, you always want to use Acid Grip when you need to move someone. If you really need to move someone, Acid Grip gets better. If you really need to move someone, Acid Grip gets even better. Secondly, Acid Grip is the most reliable way to forcibly move someone, even after accounting for all the natural advantages of skills. Stack the deck as much as you can in favor of skills and Acid Grip still comes out ahead. Finally, the extra damage you do on top of the Acid Grip, alongside all the other advantages it affords you, takes an already useful spell and makes it excellent. That'll be all for today, folks. I have been Pathfinder, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of my content, and please leave a comment if you have something to add, or if you think I missed something, or if you agree or disagree with me. Definitely comment if there's any other content you'd like to see in the future. See you next time!